It's always an investment and it's never a waste of time. Even when the opportunity is not that great, you learn from it and you become that much better of a leader. You become that much better in your home life, when you're interacting with your friends, when you have these not so great experiences.
Welcome back to another episode of The Leader Within. Today, I'm excited to introduce Riya Ganguly, an academic industry partnership expert and executive. With roughly a decade of experience in technology transfer, new venture development, and research facilitation across various academic institutions and regions, Riya has successfully negotiated and executed multiple licenses, contracts, and agreements, as well as coached and mentored numerous entrepreneurs and innovators. So I'm excited to have her share her insights with you. Well, welcome, Riya. I understand that your path was not a traditional one. You started out as a scientist, and now you work at the intersection of science and business. Because of your non-traditional path, it's helped you land 3 executive-level positions, develop your own consulting practice, achieve top 40 under 40, to name a few accomplishments. Can you share a little bit about just a story on how you were able to successfully make that shift and get to where you are today?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's this fantastic opportunity. I've actually listened to a couple of your podcasts before, some of the episodes, and they're just wonderful. So I think this is a great opportunities for leaders to be connected into other leaders, and just really appreciate you having me on the podcast. Yeah, so like you said, I started off doing my PhD. I was a scientist, a bench scientist, interested in cardiovascular disease and some of the molecular mechanisms associated with cardiovascular disease, and then more particularly understanding how fat could contribute to altering some of those mechanisms. And then when I was in my 3rd year of my PhD, I was looking at what I was going to do next. Generally, the traditional path for a lot of PhDs is to go on and become a postdoctoral fellow that would inevitably lend you potentially into a tenure track professor position. And I had started to go down that path, and in fact had landed a potential postdoc position, and then woke up one morning, and I'm serious here. I in like a cold sweat, and I said, I can't do this. I just don't want to go down this path. And it was really listening to my internal voice and understanding what I liked about my path and what I didn't. And what I liked about my path was the ability to be incredibly scientific. I enjoyed problem solving. And my favorite piece is actually communicating the science in conferences, speaking to a wide network of people. This was the thing that lit me up. So I was like, what can I do with that information now? And I found this incredible opportunity called technology transfer, which really is, as you talked about, understanding the scientific component of what's happening in a research lab, and then trying to find a way to take that research and take it outside the lab. In some cases, that's creating a startup company. In some cases, it's actually licensing that technology to a larger company that can then take it forward. This was fascinating to me. I thought, well, I finally found my dream position. And yeah, like you said, for the first 8 years of my life, of my career post-PhD, so I did complete my PhD and then started immediately in this role of technology transfer. For the first, 8 years, that's what I did. And I did it in 4 different post-secondary institutions in various ways. And I absolutely loved it. And the further I was going down this path, the more excited I was getting, the more interested I was getting. And so what I would advise to people who are kind of going down these paths is really starting to think about what it is that lights you up, even if it's not necessarily something that's traditional. And you will get quite a bit of pushback. I guarantee it. I had quite a bit of pushback in my own journey. People who said, but you did a PhD. We expected you to go here. We kind of anticipated this would be your journey. But if you really start to listen to that voice within, I think that lands you in places that inevitably give you growth. If you love what you do, inevitably you'll be successful at what you do. And that sounds a little bit like, okay, Riya, come on. But it's true, a lot of people who pursue their passions, they become quite successful. So that for me, I think was my biggest learning as I went down this sort of non-traditional path. I did acquire an MBA and an ICT to help me through the journey of becoming an executive within the business space. But yeah, this I think the key thing was really listening to myself and the things I found a strength.
I appreciate your story and your honesty in sharing about how you woke up in sweats and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to really assess this. And I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into listening to that voice. I don't know about yourself, but what I find is like in those moments when your voice is speaking to you and you don't listen, and over time you continue not to listen to that voice, it becomes softer and softer and softer. And eventually it no longer speaks up. So there's that aspect of it. But the other piece is there's that external stress, whether it's financially, you're like, it's a sunken cost today. If I don't do blank, it's gonna like cost me this or whatever it may be. So with all those factors coming into play, what was that kind of tipping point where you're like, you know what, this investment or risk, however you view it, is worth the pivot?
Yeah, I think that's such a fantastic point around not listening to that voice and, it eventually getting quieter. I think that's where we also see people moving quite a bit in their jobs, trying to find that sort of, they get stressed out in their positions, or in some cases, they end up, sort of retreating from the position. You see a lot of discontent in the workforce. And I think that comes from people not being honest about their voices. I do think there are generations of people who, particularly these latest generations, Gen Z, I think it is, that are much better at listening to their voices and taking a holistic perspective on being a part of the workforce. Some of the older generations, I'm a millennial, maybe a little bit of a mid-millennial, but I think, for me, it was a balance of, well, I listen to this voice because I was always told that this other thing was more important, listening to others, making others feel like, this is important. So I do think there's a lot to be said about the voice component of it and making sure that I think success looks different for absolutely everybody and leadership looks different for absolutely everybody. And if we're so caught up in the title and what we think we need to be doing versus what we know is important to us personally, I think that in the long run, not going to give us the ultimate success, which is truly like individual for each one of us, right? Some people, they take on multiple different things. They do 3 side hustles and a full-time gig and they're super happy, right? That's happiness. There are some people who, like to take the corporate ladder approach. That's okay too. I think we have to be okay with these different journeys as they come to be. But I think when we don't listen to our voices, where we find that discontent, it's like, I should be doing this. In terms of the investment component of it, absolutely everything I've done, and I've had a lot of different amazing opportunities in my career. Amazing. I've learned from every single one of them. So in my opinion, it's always an investment and it's never a waste of time. Even when the opportunity is not that great, you learn from it and you become that much better of a leader. You become that much better in your home life, when you're interacting with your friends, when you have these not so great experiences. So as we're going down these paths, I think it's important to realize also that everything we're doing is an investment, really. Even if it doesn't work out, that learning is an investment.
I'm going to double click into that investment piece and how every educational opportunity or whatever opportunity may be is a learning opportunity. And I think for myself, I've had to balance that between, okay, I need more for me to be qualified to do that next thing. And I'm sure, as you can appreciate as an academic expert with the amount of education that you've gained, you have to be really careful of not tipping into that analysis paralysis stage where no matter what, plus imposter syndrome, like wrap all that together with everything else that's going on to never feel like you're enough. So for you, as you continue down your journey, have you kind of had to assess like, okay, this is a business case or the facts that will justify why I think this could actually complement where I'm going versus it's the reason why I am enough to pursue that next thing?
So I think women are a little bit, perhaps we are in a position where I think we tend to do this more than men do. And there's good research out there that say that men will actually apply for positions anywhere between 40 to 60% of the qualifications that are in the position posting. They say, yeah, I'll just go for it. Versus women that we really kind of tend to focus in. And again, this is based on research, closer to almost 100%. I think my perspective on your comment very much is around, I was in a director level position in a different city. I was in academia at the time, and we were looking to move back to Edmonton. And I had just given birth. I was 6 months after having my child, and we were looking to see, okay, I really wanted to go back to the workforce. I said, well, what can I do? And I looked at this position, which is a VP level position. in an economic development agency. And that was totally outside of my area of expertise, totally outside of anything I had done before. But I put in my application, and the recruiter who called me was like, this is very different than the general candidate, but why are you interested? And again, it was listening to the voice of, I was passionate about, and I remain quite passionate about the city of Edmonton. And so I was really interested in opportunities to support the city of Edmonton. And I felt some of the work I had done in academia could potentially support the position. So when I created that narrative, it was very clear to the recruiter. And then ultimately I won the position, to those at the hiring committee, that yes, there's something there. So I would say you don't know unless you start to go down that path. It really is, again, to that earliest point of listening to that voice. The flip side of women is we have incredible intuition. And I think we have to honor that. Like, you don't see that like as a skill set, but actually it is a skill set. You know what you're capable of. And imposter syndrome, in my opinion, is when the external influence kind of comes in and like clamps that down. I loved your point about quieting that voice. Look at it like that. Be like, no, like some external thing out there is trying to quiet the thing that I know to be true. And I think that's really powerful if we can start to tap into that more.
I appreciate you sharing that. And one thing I wanted to segue into is with your executive experience and your pathway with growth and everything, what has been one of your biggest leadership epiphanies to date?
That leadership doesn't look the same. Every single leader I have either worked with or had the ability to be connected to in some way, we're all very different. And, particularly in this day and age, I would say it's kind of funny. I think we were starting to really broaden that perspective quite a bit, and maybe we're narrowing it a little bit now more. So I would encourage listeners or anybody who's, kind of thinking about this to really start to recognize that, like people, leaders are all very different, and individuals will find more connection with certain leaders than others. And I think that was a big epiphany for me, because growing up, thinking about the corporate ladder, leadership looked somewhat homogenous to me. There weren't a lot of women of color that were in leadership positions. And unfortunately, that remains the case today. As I started to climb the ladder a little bit, the one thing I realized is that it is difficult to be in those positions. And I want to really take a minute to recognize that there isn't always a lot of support in those positions for women. And you are told you have to look and react and be like everybody else. And my favorite example of this is someone telling me I had to speak up more, be louder. My voice was too soft, a little too almost muted. Yeah, speak up more. And I thought, and I said it. I said, maybe you should quiet down a little bit. And it's a thing, right? Like, that's what I mean is, if we start to have these conversations, could we change the face of what leadership looks like? And I think broaden it so that more people can connect with different kinds of leaders. It doesn't look so homogenous.
Gave you the courage to, first of all, say that out loud, and then secondly, be able to lean into your authentic leadership style. Because again, each leader has a different journey and threshold, whether it's because of how they were brought up or the environmental tolerance with what you had just described, for them to be like, you know what? I think my way of how I've approached it so far is actually going to work best for my context.
Yeah. So I had been pretty far down this journey at that point. And so I had enough confidence in myself, I think, to be able to say that. And I don't think you have to have that many years of experience and be that far down to do it. I think that's just the way that things have been. And I think that's what gives people confidence. But I think if you have that confidence by just listening to yourself and you're into your career, why not ask the question? I think being curious versus adversarial is also really important if we're going to start to really broaden it out. It's not that being loud is a bad style or trying to take up, a lot of energy or voice in the room. Sometimes that gets your point across. I think it becomes problematic when we say that's the only way leadership can be. And I think that's where the conversation really, started. It wasn't that, oh, your perspective is bad. I also didn't call them out like in a public situation. It was more in like a position where it was quiet. It was the two of us. It was meaningfully meant to be like a point of feedback. But I wanted to ask the question back, like, could we think about this a little bit more? Like, maybe, maybe you need to get it done, or maybe like there's an opportunity here to kind of look at leadership differently. So I think being curious, having confidence, and recognizing like we're trying to build workspaces that I think authentically allow people to be themselves. And I think when you do that well, then you get the best product. There's research out there that when you have more diverse teams, productivity increases and you become more competitive in the marketplace. So if we don't, diversity isn't just the way you look. It's the way we think, it's the way we speak, it's the way that we are educated and what we see in the world. If we don't allow people to show up authentically, then it isn't a fair measurement. It becomes sort of a, it's not necessarily a measurement that's going to get us to where we want to get to, that increased productivity, and we want to be competitive in the market if that's, the area that this company is competing in. So for me, I think that's what I always think about. I'm like, how do we build spaces so people can authentically show up and really be themselves, and then they feel comfortable having these conversations.
As you share about your story, it reminds me of something that I was watching where an individual was asked, well, why are you so quiet? Why is your sibling so quiet? And the way that both of them described it was, well, every single time my parent came into the room, they took up the entire space, whether it's with their energy, all they did was talk, and you didn't have a split of a second to add your opinion in there. So that carried on into the corporate world and everything. But what I've realized is that those individuals, when given the space to speak, because they're spending so much time observing, analyzing, etc., most of the time have a mic drop moment when they do say something, and individuals are more likely to listen. So I'm curious for you, as a more soft-spoken, I'm using air quotations, soft-spoken leader, what have you witnessed as an advantage for you as you continue to lead and help elevate teams?
Yeah, I think the mic drop moment I absolutely love. Actually, just an aside, I had a leader who was exactly like this, who was incredibly soft-spoken, and he rarely spoke up in meetings, but when he did, like, everyone was quiet. And I thought that was just such a like evolution from what, like, during, my academic years, during my academic training, you do see a lot more of that sort of homogenous, very like go-getter, loud sort of style. This was very different for me. So I thought, oh, I really like that. So I might imagine that I've incorporated that because I have a lot of respect for that leader in my own style as well, which is why I'm saying like it is very important to diversify leadership styles, because I think then you get people kind of connecting into styles that, work for them, and it can be multiple styles. You can speak up when you want to, don't when you don't want to, be loud when you want to, not when you want to, and then sort of allow for this sort of different connectivity. With respect to how I've led teams, I think for me, I know people, and I know this has been a piece of feedback. I was very thankful for it. Two things that I think really great pieces of feedback I received. One was you always allowed me to have space to speak my truth. I always felt like I could be really honest and authentic around you, and you would let me be that way. And guide me in a way that didn't make me feel bad about what I was saying, that it wasn't like this terrible thing that I was feeling, this particular decision wasn't in my favor. I could speak to you about that, and we could find a path forward that would be beneficial for both of us, for both the company and the individual. So that was, I think, huge learning for me to say, like, this is a helpful way to lead. It's not just this sort of definitive, this is how we're going to go. The pressure from the other side very much is, okay, this is the way we're going to go. But I think allowing people to have that feedback in and say, okay, this is how I'm feeling about it, and this is how, how it's impacting me. And then for us to kind of come to a better place together was really supportive for teams. And ultimately, that's what matters. People matter. That's what's going to make the best companies. It's the people that are in it. So I think for me, that was my biggest way of leading.
Kudos to you for doing that. Like we mentioned earlier in our conversation, if you want to bring the best out of people, you actually have to hear what they have to contribute, right? And so now I'm going to shift gears a little bit towards where you live in terms of being at the intersection of science and business. So again, you're an academic industry partnership expert, and you work at the intersection of science and business to develop IP strategies for businesses. So that's one of your zone of geniuses. What does that actually look like? And what is one of the biggest challenges that leaders are facing in this space right now?
With respect to IP, one of the things I think that I've seen is there's a desire, in Canada and around the world to think about intellectual property in a very different way, to think about how we protect intellectual property. So the things that we're creating, how we protect them, and then how we can potentially find ways to create revenue from them. I've been on several panels. I've been on investor panels before too. One of the things I might just put out there for us is, if we don't understand the science, there are people who can. And I think sometimes investors are making decisions based on how flashy a presentation might be. They might be making decisions based on the inventor, but sometimes they don't have enough knowledge about the product or the science itself. And that's sometimes where poor decisions are made and people don't necessarily get what they need. Even in due diligence, I think people can be a little bit starry-eyed about people who are coming in with deep science. And so I think that's one area that I think needs a lot of support is bring scientists to your team. Scientists are eager to do other things. And so I think having scientists as part of due diligence teams is a smart move for investors. I think they should be thinking about that. And I think that better decisions will be made as a result of that. I also think you'll get more diversity in the types of teams that are coming through. Also, not only on your investor teams and your due diligence teams, but also in terms of who's presenting. The flip side of the argument here is also feel, and this is just my own feeling, that sometimes we're not making business and investment decisions on high tech because we don't understand it. And that scares us. And so I think, again, I would advise that we start to think about diversifying the people who are thinking about this so that we, A, can protect intellectual property, but B, make better investment decisions for technologies that are in Canada or around the world so that those companies can grow and be really successful. So that's what I see as some sort of major gaps in the system, is that some of the people who are making these decisions don't always understand the science. And I think they're hesitant to put scientists on the team for whatever reason. And I would just think, again, to the point of diversity, it's thought leadership, it's different kinds of people, different styles of people coming together, being uncomfortable, and that's okay. And then finding a better path forward.
I appreciate the advice that you intertwine into just the challenge that you've noticed. And I want to double click into just the way that technology is rapidly evolving. And I know sometimes from a software development perspective, sometimes it's actually really hard to have something that is actually very unique nowadays because it's a rapid race. So I'm curious, has it impacted the way that you advise leaders and investors now with the way that things are rapidly evolving?
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. It's not a one size fits all model, but I do think having people understanding, if they're a unique component of the software and are there pieces here that can potentially be highly marketable, or is it a first to market advantage and you just jump on that and you push as hard as you can? Is it a licensing advantage? I think thinking about that with people in the room who really deeply understand technology is incredibly important. And maybe and I'm limited in the space. I just sort of started in the investor space, but the limited amount that I've been there, the one observation I do have is this sense that people don't always understand what the technology is trying to do, or even in terms of to your point around rapid development, there might be a better technology out there. And these people are telling you this is the best one out there and you're making these really big decisions on that, investment decisions on that. It might be helpful to have someone on there be actually, there's 3 versions of this technology or further, and we probably need to start thinking about that. So I don't know why people are sort of a little hesitant to bring on some of these people onto their teams. I've seen many incredible scientists, knowledge specialists that are waiting for opportunities like this one, especially in this day and age when people are taking side hustles and side gigs and consulting on the side. I think it's good to bring them on your team and to be okay, can you maybe help me out on this piece of due diligence or help me out with this sort of understanding this technology?
I would be curious if it has to do with the way that the scientist is communicating. And again, it's not black and white. It's very gray and there's a lot of it depends. But you do such a good job of breaking down complex concepts in a way where I'm okay, I can follow you on this trail. I might not be able to stay on this trail, but at least I can follow you. I think that's the biggest thing. So it's sometimes that's another thing that I've noticed being in the profession that I am is the gap between technical experts and then their target audience. So if you could offer any piece of advice because you're good at it, what would that piece of advice be?
Your point is such a great one. The on side of the investors and those that are the people are pitching to the scientists in some instances are pitching to, they're using incredibly technical jargon. sometimes they're researchers or they're professors, and their full-time gig is to be thinking exactly this way. And that is such a gift. And I'm so thankful for those individuals. On the other side of the team, I would encourage inventors, scientists, those that are really deeply connected into technology to think about diversifying their team. And it's incredibly important. And some of the best instances I've seen of this, actually saw a couple while I was at one of my last positions, is highly technical experts hiring a CEO or somehow connecting in with a business expert who can really kind of dissect it as well. There are people who live in between like me, whose full-time gig actually is to think about, okay, there's this really deep science out there. How do I communicate it out? And so you could potentially engage those individuals as well to think about, okay, I've got this really deep, deep technology, very difficult. As soon as someone says something like quantum to me, like my eyes glaze over, just like I don't know what's going on. So having someone like that, like dissect it for me would be incredibly important. So I think like you're right, it's not just on side of the investors and people making decisions. I would say you need to have people lit or scientists on that side. Opposite, you need to also have business people on your team if you're looking to gain investment or create a startup or do something along those lines. Because again, you're a technical expert and we can't be everything. And sometimes I think people are just truly curious. And so we're trying to do all these different things. So I would just encourage that level of thinking sometimes.
I appreciate that. And that ties into my second last question is, what do you think it takes to unleash an individual or organization's potential?
Being very clear and true to your own voice, whether it's an individual or whether it's a company. This world that we're living in right now with social media, with just so much influence, with information coming at us all the time, that's very specific and tailored to what, an algorithm thinks that we want to hear. Might sometimes narrow us in a way that's not authentic to ourselves, whether that be for a corporation or for an individual. Certainly for me as an individual, it takes a lot of energy to be like, who am I? What's important to me? What's going to make me feel successful? And also being really cognizant that my version of success is not anyone else's version of success. And we really do spend a lot of time giving a lot of accolades to people when they have a specific title. VP, yeah, you're amazing. You're like CEO, you're amazing. But I think leadership happens everywhere. It happens every day, all the time, and it doesn't matter what title you're given. Sometimes people have full-time gigs and that's sort of just a thing they do to pay the bills, but they're a leader in the thing that they're super passionate about, right? If it's their side hustle or the thing that they like doing on the side, that's amazing. Like that's a leader, that's someone who's figured it out on their own. Some people don't want to, have the ability not to have to take on a full-time job, but they are on boards and they're on community organizations or they're volunteering. And they're a leader of their own right there. So I just think not only do we need to diversify the types of leaders out there, but also the definition of leadership in some ways. So people can start to connect with it and authentically feel like, you know what? Yeah, I feel like this too. And then I think we start to be more connected to our own voices, who we really are. And I think that just makes for better workplaces, but also I think environments generally.
I feel like you should be the poster child for my podcast because everything that I try to highlight within this podcast, that's why I call it the leader within, because it starts with us inside and then outwards, right? So my last question to you is, if there's anybody who's looking to connect with you, what's one thing that's top of mind for you so that they can kind of use that as a bridge to connect with you if needed?
I mean, if they're looking for, just even support on a new idea that they might have or something that is kind of cooking in their sort of like back pocket, they're like, I really want to get that idea across the finish or start that idea or get that idea to a certain point. I don't know how. I've had a lot of experience in the startup space working specifically with innovators who have been out of the post-secondary system. So those that have been in deep science, deep tech. I've had a lot of experience there in the health sciences in particular. Like I said, quantum, you're going to have to give me a translator, but that is for sure. I also am always interested in meeting with people that are looking to advance their own journeys, and leadership journeys don't have to be, I want to be a CEO. It could be that I just want to find really good balance and I'm trying to figure out what that looks like. I've got 100 different things I want to do. And sometimes you need to talk it out with someone and say, what do you think? And is this helpful? And I've had the best experiences working with people like that. And when I've exited organizations, then some of my team members will come to me and they'll ask me for these kinds of supports. And that has probably been the best experience for me.
It's so amazing of you to create that space for others. I always have a soft spot for individuals like yourself, because when we are a few steps behind or to the side, whatever you want to describe it as, it's always helpful to have that individual who's already been there, done that, and then can be like, hey, these are some things to take into consideration for your context. And so, Riya, thank you so much again for sharing your insights and your story. I really appreciate it. And to everyone else that's tuned into another episode, thank you for your time and attention. It means more to me than you'll know, and I can't wait to stay in touch with you on my next episode. Till then, stay safe.